The night was silent on the edge of the human outpost. The desert winds carried dust across the empty land, and the sky glowed with twin moons. Thomas, a human engineer, was fixing the power relay outside the small station. He was used to the quiet, used to being alone. But that night something strange happened. A figure appeared from the shadows, tall and graceful. She moved like she did not belong to this world. Her skin shimmered faintly under the moonlight. Her eyes glowing like embers. She was not human. She was alien. Thomas froze. His hand tightened on the wrench. He had seen aliens before, but never one like her. She stepped closer with a slow, confident smile. Her voice was smooth and soft as she spoke. "Human, I need shelter. Will you refuse me?" Her beauty was beyond anything Thomas had seen. Her silver hair fell down her shoulders. Her lips curved with charm. Her presence was almost overwhelming. She was not just asking for shelter, she was tempting him. Testing him, Thomas took a step back. His instincts warned him this was not safe. She was too calm, too sure of herself. "Who are you?" he asked carefully. His voice steady, though his heart raced. The alien tilted her head. Her smile deepened. "Call me Solari. My people would say I am dangerous. But you, human, you see me differently, don't you?" Her words wrapped around him like a spell. But Thomas was not a man to be easily fooled. He had lived years alone, away from the noise of the galaxy. He had seen liars, thieves, and desperate wanderers. This was different. This was deliberate. Still, Thomas could see something in her eyes. Beneath the charm there was a shadow of fear, a flicker of desperation. He realized she was hiding something. She wanted him to think it was seduction, but maybe it was survival. The desert wind howled as silence stretched between them. Solari's gaze did not break. She took another step closer, so close he could feel the warmth of her body against the cold night air. "Let me in, human, and I will give you anything you desire," she whispered. Thomas's jaw tightened. He could almost hear the trap in her words. Yet instead of anger, he felt a strange pull of pity. He lowered his wrench slowly. "Fine, you can come inside," he said. "But don't play games with me." Her smile widened. But for a brief moment her mask cracked. Thomas caught the faintest tremble in her hands, the way her shoulders dropped in relief. She followed him into the station, her long steps echoing softly. Inside, the hum of machinery filled the room. Thomas closed the airlock and turned to her. "Sit," he said simply. Pointing at the metal bench, she sat with elegance, crossing her legs as if she was in control, but her eyes scanned the room like a hunted animal. Thomas poured water into a glass and handed it to her. She held it carefully, staring at the liquid as if it were rare treasure. She drank, her throat moving, and for a moment, all her beauty and charm faded, replaced by something raw and real: hunger, thirst, exhaustion. When she placed the glass down, her mask returned. "You are cautious," she said with a sly grin. "I like that." Thomas ignored the tone. He leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "Why are you here?" he asked. Solari met his eyes, her lips parting, but she did not answer right away. Instead, she leaned forward slightly, her voice softer now. "Because you're human," she said. "And humans are different." Her words sent a chill through him. Was it admiration or manipulation? He couldn't tell. Suspense filled the air like static. In that moment, Thomas knew one thing. This encounter was no accident. She hadn't just wandered into the desert. She had chosen him, and whatever reason she had. It was only the beginning. Outside, the desert night roared, but inside the small outpost, two lives had just crossed paths, one human, one alien beauty, and nothing would ever be the same again. The outpost was quiet the next morning, but the silence felt heavier than usual. Thomas moved around the small station, checking the power levels, scanning the water filters, trying to keep his mind focused on work. Yet his thoughts kept drifting to the alien woman sitting calmly on the bench. Solari watched him with eyes that seemed to see through walls. She did not look tired anymore. She looked sharp, alert, and dangerous. Her beauty was not fading in the daylight. In fact, it seemed brighter, more alive. She had not said much since last night, but her presence filled every corner of the room. Thomas tried to ignore her. He told himself she was just another stranger passing through. But every time he looked up, he found her staring at him, not with fear this time, but with something else, something closer to hunger. Finally, he spoke. "You didn't answer me last night." His voice was firm. "Why are you really here?" Solari tilted her head, Her silver hair brushed her shoulders as she gave him a slow smile. "I told you, human, I need shelter," she said. Her tone was calm, too calm. "And perhaps I need you." Her words hit him like a hidden knife. Thomas frowned. "You don't know me," he replied. She rose from the bench with graceful steps. Each movement deliberate, she walked closer, the sound of her footsteps soft on the metal floor. She stopped just a few inches away from him, close enough that he could see the faint glowing patterns running along her skin like fire under glass. "Maybe I don't know you," she whispered. "But I know what men want." Thomas stiffened. His instinct screamed to push her back, to keep distance, but instead, he stayed still, watching her carefully. "You think you can use that to survive here?" he asked, his tone cold for the first time. Celary's smile faltered. It was only for a second, but Thomas caught it. She quickly masked it with another grin. "You resist, human," she said. "That makes you interesting." He stepped aside, breaking the closeness. He grabbed a ration pack from the shelf and tossed it onto the table. "Eat," he said simply. Celary's eyes narrowed. Her pride clearly wounded. She was used to control, to bending others with charm. But here was a man who did not bend slowly. She opened the pack and began to eat, her fingers delicate, her movements still graceful even in something so ordinary. Thomas watched her silently. He noticed how she tried to look in control, yet her hands trembled slightly. Hunger was stronger than pride. After a while, Celary looked up. "Why do you not take me?" she asked suddenly, her tone sharp, almost demanding. Thomas froze. He had not expected such bluntness. "Because you're not an object," he answered. His words simple but heavy. Celary blinked. Her lips parted slightly, as if she wanted to argue, but no words came. Instead, she turned her gaze away, for the first time looking uncertain. The air between them grew thick, dangerous in a different way now. It was no longer just about charm or resistance. Something deeper was forming, something Celary had not planned. Hours passed. Thomas worked on the relay system outside. Celary followed him, not speaking much, but always staying close, too close. He could feel her presence even when she was silent, like heat at his back. At one point, he climbed onto the roof to adjust the solar panels. Celary climbed after him without hesitation. When the wind picked up, she nearly slipped. Thomas reached out and grabbed her arm. Pulling her steady, for a brief second their eyes locked. Her breath caught his grip firm. She pulled her arm back quickly, but the moment stayed between them. She had come to tempt him, but it was she who felt her heart race. As the sun set, the horizon burned with orange light. Celary sat near the doorway, her arms wrapped around her knees. She looked smaller, less like a predator and more like someone lost. Thomas stood nearby, watching her silently. She finally spoke, her voice low. "My people taught me to survive by using others. They said humans were weak, easy to control, but you..." She paused, her eyes meeting his. "You are not like what they said." Thomas did not reply, but his silence was an answer in itself. The night grew darker, the wind colder inside the outpost. Celary lay awake on the bench, staring at the ceiling. Her heart beat faster than she wanted to admit. She had come here to play a game of temptation, but now the rules were breaking. For the first time in her life, Celary wondered if she was the one being drawn in, and as sleep refused to take her, she realized something dangerous. She was beginning to dream of him, not as prey but as the only man she could not bend, the only man she truly wanted. The desert night was long and sleep was not kind to Celary. She shifted on the bench, closing her eyes only to open them again. The silence of the human outpost pressed against her ears, too heavy, too strange. She was used to noise, to voices, to command and control. But here there was only one man, and he was not like the others. Thomas woke early, the faint glow of dawn slipping through the cracks of the metal shutters. He moved with quiet strength, brewing his bitter coffee, checking the readings on the power console. He did not greet her with charm or fear. Just a nod, simple and steady. Celary watched him, her eyes tracing the lines of his face. She had tried to bend him, to make him weak, but instead, she found herself weakening. Her hands tightened against her knees, the weight of her secret burning inside her. By midday, Thomas worked outside again. The desert stretched wide, endless dunes shimmering with heat. Celary followed him, silent at first, until finally she spoke. "Why do you not ask me more, human?" Her voice carried a sharp edge. Thomas turned, his eyes narrowing. "Because you're not ready to answer," he said. His tone was calm, certain. The words struck her harder than she expected. Silari lowered her gaze. Her people always demanded answers, always pressed for control. This man gave her space. And the silence cut deeper than any question. Later, when the sun dipped low and shadows stretched across the sand, Silari finally broke. She stood by the door of the outpost, her body trembling though she hid it behind a proud stance. "I was not always free," she admitted, her voice low, almost shaking. Thomas looked up from his tools. "Go on," he said gently. Silari swallowed hard. Her silver hair caught the last light of the setting sun. "My people. They made me into something I did not choose," she whispered. "Since I was young, I was taught to use beauty. To tempt, to control, they called it survival. But it was slavery with a smile." Thomas's jaw tightened. He felt anger rise in his chest, not at her, but at the thought of what had been done to her. "They used you," he said. Silari laughed bitterly, though tears glimmered in her eyes. "They said I was valuable, but not as a person, only as a weapon of charm, of temptation. They told me men were tools, nothing more. I believed them." Until now, her voice cracked, and for the first time, the mask of confidence fell completely. Thomas stepped closer, not too close, but enough for her to see he was listening. "You're not a weapon here," he said firmly. "You're just Silari." The words pierced her deeper than she wanted. She looked away, her chest rising and falling quickly. Her hands shook as if she wanted to push him away. Yet instead she whispered, "Why do you see me like this, human?" "No one else does." Thomas did not answer with charm. He simply said, "Because it's the truth." That night, Silari sat alone near the window. Staring at the stars, the galaxy felt colder than ever. Yet inside her something warm stirred. For years she had played the role her people forced on her, always pretending, always wearing the mask. But here with this human, the mask was breaking. She dreamed again when sleep finally came. But the dreams were not of her old life, not of control or escape. They were of Thomas, his steady voice, his unshaken gaze. She saw herself standing beside him not as a manipulator, but as something real. The next morning, she moved differently. Her steps were slower, her eyes softer. She did not reach for charm. She did not play the predator. Instead, she simply watched him work. Thomas noticed the change. He said nothing, but he felt it too. The air between them no longer hummed with the same sharp danger. It carried something else now, an unspoken truth. When Silari finally spoke again, her voice was quiet. "If my people find me, they will not forgive me for leaving. They will call me broken. They will take me back, chain me, and use me again." She turned to face him, her eyes trembling with fear she had tried to hide. "Will you let them?" Thomas looked at her without hesitation. His answer was clear. "No." Silari's breath caught, her heart raced. For years she had been surrounded by men who wanted her body, her charm, her lies, but this one man, this human, gave her something none of them had: protection without demand, respect without cost. And as the desert winds howled outside, Silari realized her secret was no longer just her burden. It had become their shared truth. Inside the small outpost, two lives were no longer strangers. Something unspoken had formed, fragile but strong, dangerous but real. And though Silari had once come here to tempt, she now knew the most dangerous thing of all: she was falling. The days that followed moved slowly, but something inside the outpost had changed. The silence was no longer empty. It was filled with unspoken words, glances, and the faint rhythm of two lives adjusting to each other. Thomas repaired the systems with steady hands, welding pipes, checking power. Silari stayed near, watching, learning. At first she only observed, but soon she began to ask questions. "Why do you turn the valve this way, human?" she asked, her curiosity replacing her old mask of seduction. Thomas explained in simple words. He showed her how the filters worked, how the circuits carried power. She listened carefully, her silver eyes focused not on his face this time, but on the machines, on the work. It surprised her. She had never been allowed to learn before. Her people kept her trained only in charm, only in control. But here she was holding tools. Here she was allowed to make mistakes. Her hands trembled when she tried to fasten a bolt, but Thomas guided her gently. "Steady like this," he said. His touch was firm but never demanding. Silari felt something stir inside her, something that had nothing to do with survival. For the first time, she felt like she was more than a weapon. One evening, as the twin moons rose high above the desert, Thomas brought out 2 metal cups and filled them with warm broth. He handed one to Solari. She held it close, inhaling the steam. "This is strange," she said, "but good," Thomas chuckled. "Strange is normal out here," she smiled softly. Not her old sly smile, but something small, almost shy. She sipped the broth, letting the warmth spread through her chest. For a moment she forgot who she was supposed to be. She was just Solari, sitting beside a human under the cold stars. But peace never lasted long. Solari's mind still carried shadows. At night she woke from dreams of chains, of cruel voices calling her property. She would sit up gasping, clutching her chest, Thomas noticed. But he never pushed her to explain. Instead, he would quietly place a blanket over her shoulders and return to his corner. Those small acts of kindness cut deeper than any grand gesture. She was used to men who demanded something for every kindness. Thomas asked for nothing. That made her restless. That made her heart race in ways she did not understand. One afternoon, while Thomas worked on the roof again, Solari climbed up beside him. The wind was strong, whipping her hair across her face. She pressed her hand against the hot metal to steady herself. "Why do you live here alone?" she asked suddenly. Thomas did not answer at once. He tightened a bolt, adjusted the solar panel. Finally, he said, "Because the galaxy is too loud, too much greed, too much war out here." "I can breathe," Solari studied him. His words were simple, but she heard the weight behind them. She realized he too was running. Not from chains like her, but from noise, from chaos. "You are strange, human," she said softly. Her voice carried no mockery this time. Thomas smirked. "Takes one to know one." They both laughed. The sound awkward but real for a brief moment. The outpost felt less like a prison and more like a home. That night, Solari sat near the window again, her gaze fixed on the stars. "Do you ever dream, Thomas?" she asked. "Sometimes," he replied, "dreams of peace, dreams of quiet." She hesitated before answering, her voice low, trembling. "I dream of chains breaking, of walking without fear, but lately—" She stopped, her cheeks warming. "Lately I dream of you." Thomas froze. The air between them thickened. Solari quickly looked away, embarrassed by her own words. But the truth was already out. The silence stretched heavy and fragile. Finally Thomas spoke, his tone steady. "Dreams can change us," he said. Solari's heart pounded. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that her dreams of him meant something more than weakness. The next morning, danger reminded them both that peace was fragile. A faint signal blinked on Thomas's console. An approaching ship. Solari's face turned pale. "It could be them," she whispered. Her hands gripped the table, trembling. Thomas checked the readings. His jaw tightened. "Maybe it's a traitor," he said. Though his voice carried doubt, he glanced at her. "Stay close to me." Solari nodded. Her heart raced faster than ever. She realized then that her fear was no longer just of being taken back. Her fear was of losing him, and as the ship drew nearer, Solari understood the truth she had been running from. Her bond with this human was no longer a trick, no longer survival. It was real, dangerous, and unstoppable. The sound of engines echoed faintly across the desert sky. The small outpost trembled as the ship drew closer. Thomas stood by the console, his face hard. Solari paced behind him, her movements sharp with fear. "It's them, isn't it?" she whispered. Her voice carried both dread and certainty. Thomas scanned the readings, his eyes narrowed. "Could be traitors, could be scavengers," he replied. "But from the signal code, it's military grade." Solari's chest tightened. Her past had finally caught up. The hunters were here. Her people would never let her go, not when they considered her valuable, not when they believed she belonged to them. The ship landed in a swirl of dust, heavy metal doors slamming against the sand. Thomas grabbed his rifle from the rack, checked the charge, and turned to her. "Stay inside," he said firmly. Solari shook her head. "No, they're here for me. If they see only you, they'll kill you. If they see me, they'll chain me." Her voice cracked as her silver eyes met his. "I cannot let either happen." Thomas stepped closer, his voice calm but filled with fire. "You're not theirs anymore." Before she could answer, the door of the outpost slammed open. Figures in dark armor marched in. Their helmets glowed red, weapons raised. The leader's voice boomed. "Return her to us, human, and we will let you live." Solari froze, her heart pounded. This was the moment she had feared since she escaped. The mask she once wore, the charm, the seduction, rose to her lips like instinct. But when she looked at Thomas standing tall, rifle steady, she realized something had changed. She no longer wanted to survive by tricks. She wanted to survive by truth. Thomas's voice cut the silence. "She's not going anywhere," the soldiers laughed, a cruel sound that echoed in the small room. "Do not test us, human. She is property," the leader growled. Solari's hands shook. Her people had always called her that word, property. It burned her like a brand, but Thomas, without hesitation, stood between her and the soldiers. "She's not property," he said. "She's Solari." Her breath caught, tears stung her eyes. No one had ever spoken for her like that. The soldiers raised their weapons. Tension snapped like lightning in the air. Thomas braced himself, finger tight on the trigger. But before the first shot could fire, Solari stepped forward, her voice rang clear. "Stop!" The soldiers hesitated. Recognizing her command tone, Solari's body trembled, but she forced the words out. "I am not yours anymore. I will not go back, not now. Not ever," the leader sneered. "You are trained to say what we taught you. Nothing more." He raised his weapon, aiming at Thomas in that instant. Solari's instincts roared. She leapt forward, pushing Thomas aside as the blast fired. The shot scorched the wall behind them. Thomas rolled back to his feet, rifle blazing. Two soldiers dropped before they even knew what happened. Chaos erupted inside the outpost. Sparks flew as weapons clashed. The air filled with the smell of smoke and metal. Thomas fought with fierce precision, protecting every inch between the soldiers and Solari. She ducked behind the console, her heart racing. For a moment, she saw him, the human who had no reason to risk his life, no reason to fight for her, yet here he was. Standing against trained hunters, his courage was stronger than chains. The remaining soldiers hesitated. Their leader barked orders. But Thomas's fire was relentless. With each blast, with each step forward, the hunters began to falter. Finally, one shouted into his comm, "Retreat! We regroup later." The soldiers dragged their wounded and fled. The ship engines roared. Lifting them back into the sky, silence returned. Broken only by Thomas's heavy breathing, Solari rushed to his side. Her hands brushed over his arm. "Are you hurt?" she asked, her voice shook. Thomas shook his head, his chest rising and falling. "I'm fine," he said. "But they'll be back." Solari's eyes burned with tears. "You risked everything for me," she whispered, her voice cracked. "Why?" Thomas looked at her, his expression steady. "Because you're not a weapon, you're not property, you're a person. And no one takes you without going through me." Her heart broke and healed at the same time. The chains inside her shattered. For years she had been told she was nothing more than beauty. A tool, a possession, but now, because of him, she dreamed of something more that night. As the desert lay quiet again, Solari sat beside Thomas. Her head rested lightly against his shoulder. Her voice soft, trembling. "I used to dream of freedom, but now—" "I dream of you." Thomas said nothing, but his silence was not rejection. It was steady, like the ground beneath her feet. And in that moment, Solari knew her turning point had come. She no longer wanted to tempt him. She no longer wanted to play games. She wanted only him and nothing else. The desert was quiet again, but the silence carried weight. It was not the peaceful kind. It was the silence before another storm. Inside the outpost, Thomas checked the damage. Burn marks scarred the walls. Smoke still clung to the air. He repaired what he could, but his mind was elsewhere. He knew the soldiers would not give up. They would come back, stronger, better prepared. Solari sat at the corner, her hands trembling as she held a cup of water. She could not erase the memory of the soldiers' voices calling her property. Their words crawled under her skin like chains. But then she remembered Thomas standing in front of her. His voice firm, his rifle blazing, and for the first time in her life, she had not felt weak, still fear lingered. "They won't stop," she whispered, breaking the silence. "They will hunt me until I'm in chains again, and now—" "They will hunt you too." Thomas glanced at her. His eyes steady. "Let them come," he said. His tone was calm, almost too calm. "I'm not afraid of them." Solari's chest tightened. His courage gave her strength, but also fear. Fear that he would die because of her. Fear that she would lose the only person who ever saw her as more than a tool. That night she couldn't sleep. She sat near the window, staring at the stars. Every sound outside made her flinch. She expected shadows to appear, soldiers to storm in. Her heart would not slow. Thomas noticed. He walked over quietly, placing a blanket around her shoulders. "You should rest," he said. She looked up at him, her silver eyes shimmering with fear. "What if they come while I'm asleep?" she asked, her voice small. Then I'll wake you, he replied simply. His words were steady like stone for a moment. Her lips trembled. She wanted to argue, to tell him he didn't understand, but the warmth of the blanket and his calm presence eased her chest. Slowly, she leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder. It was the first time she allowed herself to feel safe. The next day, the warning came. A coded transmission burst through the console. Thomas decoded it. His face hardened as he read the message. They're coming, and this time it's not just a squad. It's a unit, Solari's hands shook. Then we can't fight them, she whispered. They will crush us, Thomas shook his head. We fight smart. We use the land, the storm, the machines. This is not just about surviving, Solari. This is about making sure they never try again. Solari stared at him. Her heart pounded. He was just one man, a human engineer on the edge of nowhere. Yet he spoke with the fire of an army. That evening they prepared. Thomas showed her how to load a weapon. Her hands shook at first, but he guided her, patient and steady. Like this, he said, breathe, aim, trust yourself. Solari nodded. For years she had been told her only power was her beauty. Now she held a weapon. Now she had a choice. As night fell, the sound of engines filled the sky again. This time, louder, heavier, a fleet of ships descended, their lights cutting through the desert darkness. Solari's breath came fast, her body trembled. But Thomas placed a hand on her shoulder. Stay close to me, he said, no matter what. The ships landed, sandstorms whipping around their metal bodies. Dozens of armored soldiers marched out, their weapons gleaming. The leader stepped forward, his voice a growl. Last chance, human, give her to us. Or be buried in the sand. Thomas stood tall, rifle in hand, his voice steady. Come and try. The soldiers raised their weapons. The desert roared with the sound of engines, the hum of plasma rifles charging. Solari's heart pounded in her chest. She knew this was not just another fight. This was the moment everything would change. Thomas looked at her once, his eyes steady. No matter what happens, remember, you're not theirs. Tears stung her eyes. She wanted to speak, to tell him how much he meant to her, but the words caught in her throat. All she could whisper was, and you're not alone anymore. Then the storm of battle began. The night lit up with fire. Plasma blasts tore across the sand. Thomas moved with sharp precision. Every shot finding its mark, Solari fired too. Her hands shaking at first, but soon finding strength. She was no longer a weapon for them. She was fighting for herself. For him, explosions rocked the desert, sand clouds rising like walls. The soldiers pressed harder, but Thomas's defenses, his traps, his knowledge of the land turned the battle into chaos for them. And in the middle of the storm, Solari felt something shift. She had once dreamed only of freedom, but now, she dreamed of standing beside him forever. Even if the whole galaxy came to take her away, she would not let go. The desert exploded with fire and thunder. Blasts of plasma streaked across the night, painting the sand in flashes of blue and red. Thomas fired with steady hands, his body moving with sharp precision. Every step he took was calculated. Every shot meant to protect. Beside him, Solari fought too. Her silver hair whipped in the wind, her eyes burning with defiance. She had once been told she was nothing but a weapon of charm. But tonight she fought with her own will, not to tempt, not to survive, but to stand by the human who had changed her life. The soldiers pressed forward. Armored and relentless, their leader barked orders. Their boots thundered across the sand. But Thomas had prepared for this. The traps he had set earlier came alive. Energy spikes hidden beneath the dunes erupted, sending blasts of light that threw soldiers into the air. Solari gasped, watching Thomas fight like no man she had ever known. He was not trained like her people. He was not born into war. Yet he fought with courage that eclipsed all the hunters for the first time. She realized what made humans different. When they fought with their hearts. Still, the enemy was strong. More ships hovered above. Lights glaring, Solari's fear rose. What if they overwhelmed him? What if she lost him now? The leader shouted again, his voice carrying over the battlefield. Enough games, human. Hand her over and we might spare your life. Thomas's jaw tightened. He raised his rifle, his voice a roar. She's not yours to take. Solari's heart cracked. Tears stung her eyes. No one had ever spoken for her like this. No one had ever risked so much. The soldiers advanced, and Thomas was forced back step by step. Solari grabbed his arm. We can't win like this, she cried. They're too many. Thomas looked at her, his face set. Then we make them afraid, he said. He activated the final trap. The ground beneath the soldiers lit up, a surge of power exploding into a wall of fire. Several hunters fell. The rest stumbled back in shock. For a moment, silence cut the air. Solari stood tall, her chest heaving. She stepped forward, her voice carrying louder than the storm. "I am not your property," she screamed. Her voice cracked with years of pain. "I am Solari, and I choose my own path." The soldiers faltered, even their leader paused. They had never heard her speak like this, never seen her resist. Thomas stood beside her, rifle aimed. "And if you try to take her again, you'll answer to me." The tension stretched. The soldiers exchanged glances. They had not expected this much resistance, not from one human and one runaway. Finally, the leader snarled, "This isn't over." He signaled to retreat. The ships lifted into the sky. Vanishing into the night, the desert fell silent again. Only the crackle of dying fire remained. Solari's knees gave way. She collapsed into the sand, tears spilling down her face. Thomas dropped beside her, his hand on her shoulder. "It's over," he whispered. She looked at him, her body trembling. "You fought for me when you had no reason. You could have given me up and saved yourself. But you didn't." Her voice shook. "Why, Thomas? Why would you do that?" Thomas met her eyes, his expression calm but full of quiet fire. "Because you're worth more than they ever told you," he said. "And because somewhere along the way I stopped seeing you as just someone to protect. I started seeing you as someone I can't lose." Solari's heart surged. The words broke the last of her chains. She threw her arms around him, her body shaking with sobs. "I don't want freedom without you," she whispered. "I don't want escape, I don't want games. I only want you." Thomas held her close, his arms steady around her. "Then stay," he said simply. She pulled back, her silver eyes glowing with tears and new light. "I dream of you, Thomas," she admitted, her voice trembling but strong. "Not because I was trained to, not because I was told to, but because I love you." The desert wind howled, carrying her confession into the endless night. Thomas did not answer with words. He simply leaned forward, resting his forehead gently against hers. It was enough. It was everything. From that night, Solari was no longer a runaway, no longer a weapon. She was Solari, the alien beauty who had once tried to tempt a human, but now dreamed only of him. And Thomas, the lone human on the edge of nowhere, was no longer alone. He had someone who had chosen him, not for what he could give, not for what he could be forced into, but because of who he was. The outpost stood quiet under the twin moons, but inside 2 hearts had made their choice, and the galaxy, though it did not yet know it, had been changed forever.